Hello everyone. We're here for episode 14 of the Exodus seminar, and we're approaching the end of Exodus proper. We will embark from there on a journey through the remaining books that cover the story of the Israelites' sojourn through the desert, laying out the structure of the basic narrative. But we'll actually finish Exodus proper today. We're going to begin with a reiteration of Exodus 33, discussion between Moses and God, and discuss the strange narrative account of God revealing himself in part to Moses, and try to delve into what that might mean, say, existentially, metaphorically, and possibly even in reality. So, Exodus 33. And the Lord said unto Moses, Depart and go up hence, thou and the people which thou hast brought up out of the land of Egypt, unto the land which I swear unto Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob, saying, Unto thy seed will I give it. And I will send an angel before thee, and drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, Hittite, Perizzite, Hivite, and the Jebusite, unto a land flowing with milk and honey. For I will not go up in the midst of thee, for thou art a stiff-necked people, lest I consume thee in thy way. And when the people heard these evil tidings, they mourned, and no man did put on him his ornaments. For the Lord had said unto Moses, Say unto the children of Israel, You are a stiff-necked people. I will come up in the midst of thee in a moment, and consume thee. Therefore now put off thy ornaments from thee, that I may know what to do unto thee. And the children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments by the Mount Horeb. And Moses took their tabernacle and pitched it outside the camp, afar off from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of the congregation. And it came to pass that everyone which sought the Lord went out unto the tabernacle of the congregation, which was without the camp. And it came to pass, when Moses went out unto the tabernacle, that all the people rose up and stood every man at his tent door, and looked after Moses until he was gone into the tabernacle. And it came to pass, as Moses entered into the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked with Moses. And all the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the tabernacle door, and all the people rose up and worshipped, every man in his tent door. And the Lord spake unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend. And he turned again into the camp. But his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, departed not out of the tabernacle. And Moses said unto the Lord, See, thou sayest unto me, Bring up this people, and thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. Yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and thou hast also found grace in my sight. Now therefore I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. And he said, My presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest. And Moses said unto him, If thy presence not go with me, carry us not up hence. For wherein it shall it be known? For wherein shall it be known here that I and thy people have found grace in thy sight? Is it not in that thou goest with us? So shall we be separated, I and thy people, from all the people that are on the face of the earth? And the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken, for thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. And Moses said, I beseech thee, show me thy glory. And God said, I will make all my goodness pass before thee, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before thee, and will be gracious, to whom I will be gracious, and will show mercy, on whom I will show mercy. And the Lord said, Thou canst not see my face, for there shall no man see me and live. And the Lord said, Behold, there's a place by me, and thou shalt stand upon a rock. And it shall come to pass that while my glory passeth by, that I will put thee in a cleft of the rock, and cover thee with my hand while I pass by. And I will take away my hand, and thou shalt see my back parts, but my face shall not be seen. And that ends Exodus 33, this mysterious end where God decides, miraculously enough, to reveal himself to Moses, but only veiled and partial in some sense.
Yeah. So I think that understanding why God shows himself this way is understanding the whole book is all about that. We've been talking about this since the beginning, is that in order for God to manifest himself in the world, it has to be mediated. And so these mediations appear in all kinds of forms. The law is a veil. The tabernacle is veils. And then when Moses comes back down, he will have his face veiled. And people sometimes try to see it a little too simply, where they wonder, well, okay, so why is God bad? Like, why doesn't God want to show his face? Like, why, what's going on with God? But we have to understand it as really the way in which reality unfolds. And sometimes you can understand it, if you apply it to a lower form of reality, you can kind of understand it. And you can use any purpose of something, and I always use sports because it's easy to understand. So you can understand, let's say a basketball team are playing basketball, and basketball is the reason, right? It's the telos, it's the source of why we exist as a basketball team. But basketball itself has to be mediated into different actions. You learn to dribble, you learn to shoot, you learn to run, and all these things are veiled versions of the telos of basketball. They're mediated. They are the telos of basketball brought into a specific. And so without the reason, dribbling is a stupid thing. It's a silly thing that has no purpose. But if it's connected to the highest, then it becomes coherent, and it binds all these actions together towards this telos. But you could say something like, if the purpose of basketball, if I would ask you, like, play basketball, and then I would not show you anything of how to play, none of the ways that you're supposed to play, then you would be, obviously not completely, but you would be consumed by basketball. And I put you on the court, like in a professional basketball team, and I go, all right, play basketball. And then you're completely crushed because you don't have the mediated, veiled realities in which basketball participates. So it is actually the way that reality functions.
I like the game metaphor too, because oddly enough, you might say, well, why would something complete only reveal itself partially? And the answer is, I think, to facilitate certain operations that can only be undertaken in partiality. And so I do believe that it's the case that we do the same thing whenever we play a game. And when we play a game, this is particularly true of online games, it's quite obvious, we make a micro-universe. The game is a micro-universe. It's set up according to certain principles, and you veil yourself to play it. You limit yourself while you're playing the game to the scope of the game, and so you parcel off a part of yourself that's simpler than you are, because when you're playing chess, it doesn't encapsulate every bit of what you could conceivably do.
Don't talk about your date the night
before. No, you don't, and you don't
chess.
flip the chessboard over either, because you could bring an atomic weapon to the chess game, and you don't, right? And so in order to engage in the game, you parcel off part of yourself, and weirdly enough, this is the thing that's so strange, is by imposing that set of limits on yourself, you now open up a whole world of possibility that you wouldn't have if you didn't accept the limits. And I also think the veiling idea, the idea that God can only show himself partially, is also a necessary consequence of the inevitable complexity of the relationship between the infinite and the finite. It's like human beings are clearly finite. You don't have to be a religious thinker to note that. And there is something that's infinite, whatever that is, and they're not the same thing, the infinite and the finite, and it isn't obvious that they can coexist, because the infinite would destroy the finite, obviously. But it's also not obvious that the finite exists in detachment from the infinite, because we have a relationship with the infinite of one sort or another, and then the notion here is, well, it has to be veiled, it has to be partial, and it's kind of like the idea of kenosis that the Catholics came up with regard to Christ, because one of the conundrums that Christians wrestled with was, well, how could God and man be united in Christ? Why wouldn't the form of Christ be torn asunder by the descent of God into that form? And the Catholic idea was kenosis, is that there was an emptying of God. And it's like the way I like to think about it as a modern person is that it's like a low resolution representation of God. It's a fractal representation, and the entirety isn't there, but the pattern is there.
It becomes more mysterious when you understand that veils are a form of death, and that's tough for people to understand. But it's there in the story of Genesis, where the first covering that God gives Adam and Eve is a covering of dead skins, dead animal skins, and so there's a form of dying that happens at every level between the infinite and its manifestation. And that's why ultimately the mystery, I guess, for Christians of the crucifixion is that ultimate mystery where God manifests itself all the way to the edge, like fills the whole world. And what that looks like is the crucifixion. That's what it looks like.
Well, is that transforming of yourself into an avatar during a game, is that acceptance of limitation, is that an acceptance of a form of death at the same time? That because it's the death of a certain realm of possibility, right? But it opens up it enables an entirely new realm of possibility. That's the paradoxical thing with a game, right? Because you accept these incredibly particularized limitations. There's almost nothing you can do on a chess game, but there's an almost infinite number of potential chess games, and none of that whole infinity wouldn't exist without that imposition of this principle, the set of principled limitations. It's so strange.
Well, there can't be any I-thou relationship without some rules to mediate, without some limitations to what I am. If I'm all-encompassing, there's no I-thou relationship, and that's really what Moses is asking for, is for that relationship that connects him to the Almighty. There are a couple of things here that are really just beautiful and fascinating. One is the superfluous language. The view in Judaism is that in the Bible there are no superfluous words. So anything that is repeated is actually repeated for a reason. And so when you look at this bizarre section where God physically puts Moses into a rock, right, and surrounds him with the rock, God can protect Moses without the rock. I mean, he's God. He can do whatever he wants. And so it does make you think, well, what exactly is the rock supposed to represent there, right? Well, the latest iteration of that particular material in the story has been the tablets, right? Is the idea that the law is encompassed in stone. And so the idea is that God has constructed the law in order to surround Moses and protect him. But that's not enough. The law isn't enough. There also has to be God revealing himself. You have to have a relationship with God, but God can only reveal himself and allow you to live in a veiled way. And the language that's used there, that God protects Moses with his own hand, right? He puts his hand for that fourth wall there to protect Moses and encapsulate him there. And then he passes in front of him. And all that Moses can see is his back. That language is so unbelievably evocative because think of the people that you know. I can recognize my children by the way that they walk. If they're walking away from me, I can sense them. I know they're my kids, my wife, my parents, anybody that you know and who you love. You know exactly how they walk. You know what they look like from the back. You've seen them walk away from you 1,000 times. But you don't know what they're thinking, right? The only way that you can see what somebody's thinking is by seeing their face. And so the idea here is you don't know what God is thinking, but you know that he's present, and you can recognize and identify God. And not just that, he passes in front of Moses, and he's walking presumably away from Moses, metaphorically speaking. And so that obviously speaks of the idea of God walking sort of through history. The way that you can identify God's presence is by looking at history, which is one of the messages of the Bible that is very different from a lot of pagan religions, which suggest the circularity of history. The Bible suggests a real linearity in history, and that the way that you can identify God, particularly in the Bible, is that he has chosen a nation, he's taken that nation out of slavery, he's put himself into history and intervened in history in particular ways. And you can see his presence in history by the way that he is walking through history. But you can, in some cases, only see that in retrospect, right? You can only see that after it's happened.
Hindsight. Like we use the word. It's like after something has happened, it's like you look back and you see
that's why that happened.
The footsteps of God through whatever.
Because if you could see it happening, if you could see it as it was coming out, you could see God's face. But you can't, right?
Well,
that's not something you're capable of doing.
The God that is inscribed on the stone, let's say, the laws, they are the consequence, like they're the wisdom of history. So it is as if God has written them in stone with his fingers. These are the patterns of history, right? These are the fundamental elements of necessary social organization. And so they are protection of stone. But the other element of protection too, with regards to the tablets, is that if you follow the divine law that's inscribed on stone itself, then you're also protected from the harshest judgment of well, of the infinite, right? If you abide by the minimal set of social rules, the probability that you're going to get torn apart by fate and your fellow beings is radically decreased.
Well,
So
Proverbs 29, without a vision, a people perisheth.
Right.
So this, of course, is the great contrast with, I suppose, secular contemporary culture. This idea that the vision of God is a necessary condition of the flourishing of society. And without that vision, a people perisheth.
Well, there's technical reasons for that, I would say, that we know biologically now too, is that almost all enthusiasm, and so that is to be filled with the Spirit of God, that's positive emotion. And all positive emotion of the most intense sort, I don't mean satiation and satisfaction, I mean hope and enthusiasm that moves you forward, is tied to a vision, because all positive emotion signals movement towards a valued goal. And so what that implies is no goal, no positive emotion, but it also applies that a high vision produces positive emotion and enthusiasm. And so that would be one reason you wouldn't perish, because you wouldn't be hopeless. But another reason too is that if we don't share a vision, then we're not united. And if we're not united, then we're fractious. And if we're fractious, we're going to destroy one another. And so it's literally the case that without a vision, that people perish. It's not a metaphor at all. And if they don't perish, they wish they would.
Could I add a very simple point? I mean, we've seen so much of the awe of God. And then you have, we're not to take his name in vain. And so the high priest is the only one who says Yahweh out loud once a year. But this is incredible because God himself says his own name. And that's what's so amazing about the passage we're about to read.
Yeah, I've kind of revamped my earlier view about taking the Lord's name in vain. You know, I thought, well, it definitely meant do not take to yourself what is religious to justify your own tyrannical presuppositions. But I also think there is likely an injunction against the casual use of the sacred, right? The casual reference. It's like touching the Ark of the Covenant by mistake. You should be careful when you're treading near holy ground, just as a matter of practice. So
I think
to modify my speech to take that into account.
I think we said in the previous episode that God's self-description in verses 19, where he talks about, I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. That's plainly an echo. I think Ben said this in the last episode of Exodus 3:14. But as it were, it's not as if the reason that there's a shift here is from what's happened in chapter 32. It's the golden calf. It's God is showing mercy on the Israelites after their sin. And it's not, we've talked a little bit about, does God change? How can he be the same? How can he be in relationship and still not change? I think it's a very subtle way of understanding that this is not God changing. It's not God's personality changing. It's, as it were, our relation to God, our understanding of God is progressively, God is progressively revealed to us through the changes, through the actions and the decisions that we undertake. And I think it's a very important point. It preserves God's immutability, maybe his impassibility, his freedom from suffering, but it also explains how we can, as it were, enter into relationship with him.
Well, that's the concept of prayer, which is very difficult to understand on sort of the raw childish level, which is God is gumball machine, right? You put in your quarter and the gumball comes out. The idea of prayer that you're talking about is obviously a lot more meaningful, because it's really not about changing God's mind, it's about changing who you are, and thus God naturally responds to you differently because you're not the person that you were before you prayed. And the verb to pray in Hebrew is actually in the reflexive tense, right? Lahit palel, right? Which is supposed to, the idea is that it's supposed to be something that acts on you. The prayer is supposed to act on you. It's not supposed to be something where you're attempting to pry an answer out of God. Actually, one of my favorite, kind of dark headlines from The Onion is God answers prayers of paralyzed little boy, no, says God, right? Like, which is obviously incredibly dark and terrible, but also true, meaning like God does say no, but the idea is that the person he's saying no to might be a different person than the person he says yes to tomorrow, because you change yourself in order to be the person who deserves a different response from God.
And maybe that's the whole message of the construction of the tabernacle, that it's not something that, as it were, God does to the people, to the Israelites. It's not sort of God acting through miracles or even through revelation. That the revelation is an enabling condition of that, but it's what the Israelites undertake together. It's what they do together
to be able to receive
that
the
ultimately
revelation.
Transforms them into the people that God's called them to be.
Well, I think it certainly seems to me to be a productive way to consider prayer, and I really do believe that our capacity to think, and I'm thinking about this as an evolutionary biologist, actually emerged out of the domain of prayer, because thought seems to me to have a prayer-like structure. The first is, I have a problem that I need to solve. So that's like an admission of insufficiency. And the next is, the answer could make itself manifest. Now you might say, well, I'll think it up, but that's a pretty sad explanation. It's more like, no, you admit you have a problem, and then you open yourself up to a revelation. And then the revelation makes itself manifest. The thought appears. And it's just often, especially if it's a deep thought and a deep new thought, it strikes you as a surprise, right? It's not like you predicted it. It springs itself on you as if it's something new.
Thinking and thanking are etymologically related.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I want to return to Moses' role for a moment. Douglas asked a question yesterday, and I want to amend the answer that I gave, because you were asking about Moses as not being perhaps sufficiently defined. And I went to the archetypal, or the assimilating ego, let's say, where he's mediating between the id of the golden calf and the superego that's God. But I think that gives him short shrift. And so in contemporary narrative, where we have that aha moment, the sixth sense, the usual suspects, it's where the mythic meets the particular, where it's 1 second ahead of you, but it's immediately graspable. You're just talking about that a little bit. And with Moses, one of the things I was thinking about is it's evident for me very much with Jesus. There's a number of moments where I'm about my Father's business, right? It's the shocking moment, but then immediately you sort of grasp what that means, right? Why hast thou forsaken me? Like, forgive them, they know not what they do. But I think I think it's short shrift to consider Moses more archetypal, like as a rough draft for Jesus, because the more that we're reading this and spending time in this, there's a lot more that's emerging for me that I hadn't thought before this discussion. That is the specific and is the particular. Show me thy glory. When he asks for his name to be blotted out of the books, there's out of God's book. And so there are these traits, I think, that three-dimensionalize him more than my initial answer of tacking to the archetypal or the Western. He's got courage, he's got curiosity, he's got an opening to all no matter the cost, right? Striving and seeking. There's a whole number of modes of his engagement that I think are a lot more robust than I initially led with.
If I can just say something about that particularity, there's a sense, Jordan, when you talk about the veil, God veiling himself, that one could read that as, God's not wanting to show you all of himself, you're not allowed to see it all. But I think in a way that's a mistake. I mean, this is more about the way in which things can actually happen in this mediated sense. Jonathan's saying, you don't feed a baby with a fire hose of milk. You don't when you're cold coming in from the snow or whatever, you don't warm yourself up with a blowtorch. You don't teach a calculus to a 2-year-old. And so I think this is related to what I see as the profound tenderness in this passage. There's something so beautiful, and it shall come to pass while my glory passes by, thou put thee in the cleft or cleft of the rock, and pass by thee. And there's that sense of the almighty, sovereign, sort of infinite that could destroy you in a flash, making himself such that you can hear and see. And this reminds me very much of the language at certain parts in the New Testament. The hairs of thy head are numbered, and how careful you like the sparrows of the field and the lilies of the valley. The sense that which is highest not only knows us, but makes itself such that with a tenderness we can hear and see and feel and live that.
Well, and I would also say, again, that's believable if you can think about it very practically. If God is the great animating spirit of mankind at minimum, how would that make itself manifest moment to moment? It would be in the same veiled manner that a very strong man would make himself available to wrestling with a child. It's like you don't unleash your full force, you veil. You only release the amount of force that's necessary in precise proportion to keep the game going. Exactly that. And so it's very realistic that is part and parcel of the structure of being.
And it's amazing how much changes in life. You can be depressed or overwhelmed or, sad. If you step into thinking, this actual circumstance right now is God loving me. If I can make the move to think, the move is kind of move of faith, to think that these terms right here and now, not sometime in the future, not after all these things change, not after I get my act together, but right now and here, providence, you might say, the highest in what is most determining in all of reality itself is conspiring right here and now to love me. That makes a big difference.
That's a rough one. Well,
I love bringing this back to freedom, because when Ben introduced the idea of Tzimtzum, or however you pronounce it, as I understand it, God is everywhere, but with a limitation, not the human heart. And that's the origin of freedom. And you have this idea in the Bible of the primacy of the heart, and that things flow from there. And I love that idea, the limitation.
The notion that God has to limit himself to allow for free choice, that is the ultimate act of love, is allowing somebody who you love to make choices, and those choices are not going to go
with your kids.
It's the most difficult thing. I mean, as a young parent with 3 kids and a 4th on the way at this point, it is the hardest thing. And one of the hardest things for me is I have a 9-year-old daughter, and she is doing her math homework, and I can see that she's working on a multiplication problem. In the middle of the problem, I can see she's doing it wrong, right? And you can step in and you can tell her she's doing it wrong, and you can correct her, or you can let her go through the entire process and discover for herself that she's doing it wrong, and go back and learn how to correct herself and actually make herself stronger at math. And the temptation for a parent is, I have to fix this and I have to fix it right now. If she goes this far, she's going to go 3 more steps down the road. It's going to be 10 minutes of whining, right? Let's just get this thing done. But the move that I've had to learn is to allow her to actually go through that process and then understand that, you know what, you can survive the failure and you can go back and you can fix it. And it's not the end of the world to fail, and it's not a waste of time to fail. That's actually how you learn to do things.
And to tolerate failure.
Exactly, and it makes you a stronger and more powerful person and a more self-reliant person. And if you don't, you end up enabling, which is, I would say generationally is what we've done.
There's a psychotherapeutic and clinical rule of thumb. You can think about this most usefully, I would say, in relationship to the care of the elderly. It's like, and the rule is, do not do anything for those under your care that they can do for themselves. Right? Because it's a form of theft, and right? Well, you're depriving them of their agency, their dignity, their responsibility, their destiny, their purpose, all of that. And sometimes it's a lot easier just to do it. That's another thing you find out with kids. And so, and you also learn very rapidly as a psychotherapist as well that it's possible to enable learning on the part of your clients, but it's very difficult to teach them anything. Right? Those are very different things, is that if the person has come up with a solution, I talk to clients and I think, well, I know the way out of that. And I could just tell you, it's like, no, it's not, it's like you miss the dribbling bits, you miss the particulars of the game. If you help the person move too quickly to the conclusion.
You obliterate them. You extend past your boundaries and you obliterate them.
You humiliate them because it's like, well, this is obvious. Here's the solution. But you also interfere with the process by which they would build up that knowledge from the bottom up in every way, right? And that's a big mistake. And it's also counterproductive. It doesn't produce psychotherapeutic progress if you just offer advice to your clients. You got to not do that in a psychotherapeutic relationship.
I mean, what that really suggests is that what God wants is for us to, and this goes back to Genesis, he wants us to get stronger, and that means struggling with him. He doesn't want religion to be easy. I mean, I think that the thing that so many people who are secular think about religious people is that religious people don't think about these questions at all. They act as though the question of theodicy, for example, has never come up in all of human history, right? No, why do bad things happen to good people?
I'd like to offer you a proof that you'll find fascinating. I was invited to debate the head of the largest atheist organization in the U.S. in Minneapolis about 15 years ago. By the way, of course, when did they schedule it? Easter Sunday. It was so obvious why they did that. But in any event, I was very impressed that they invited me.
The good news is they knew you were Jewish, so it didn't matter to you. So it was all fine.
Right. I'll tell you something I did afterwards. My wife and I did. You'll find very fascinating. But anyway, So we had this debate, and I give them total credit for inviting me. They couldn't have been kinder. Unlike some religious organizations, they paid me that day. I just want to make that clear. Credit goes where it is due. And I looked at the audience at one point, about 400 atheists, and I said, would you raise your hand if you ever doubt your atheism? For example, if you've seen your child born, or any child born, or anything like, or heard a Beethoven symphony, do you ever doubt your atheism? Not one hand went up. And then I said, you think, this is based on what you were just saying, you think we religious people don't question ourselves. You don't question yourself, because every religious person I have ever spoken to, and that's thousands upon thousands, has acknowledged that they doubt their faith at times and they struggle with it. We struggle, you don't. It was a really a clarifying moment.
It's legitimately embedded in the text, right? I mean, in Genesis, the name Yisrael literally means struggle with God.
Right,
That's
right,
what it
right,
means,
right.
right? I mean, and the whole narrative of Jacob wrestling with the angel is essentially Jacob wrestling with the problem of why do bad things happen to good people and how do I deal with that?
Yep.
And so,
how do I orient myself to the good despite the fact that bad things happen to good people?
Exactly.
Right?
And
Why would I maintain faith under those conditions?
When people act as though religion is supposed to resolve your struggle, no, religion is supposed to make you struggle. The religious way is the hard way. It's the only satisfying way, in my view. But it is a much harder way, no question. I mean, the easiest thing to say is there's no meaning to anything, so I'm not even going to bother thinking about this ever again.
So I'd like to ask. I just want to ask one more clarifying question, which I think everyone will find of interest. I know I will. So you mentioned, Stephen, about God loving us, and then we moved on. So I assume that everyone at this table who believes in God believes God loves them. Is that a fair assumption? Okay. So I'd like to ask you a simple question, and I'd like Ben, as the other religious Jew here, we have another Jew as well. So I don't believe God loves everyone equally. Do you, Ben?
Now you're in trouble.
I'd put it a little bit differently, but practically speaking, yes. The outcome of God's love does not fall equally on everyone is the way that I would put it. Meaning it's available to everyone if they seek it, but most people don't seek it, so it doesn't fall on them equally. I don't think God loves people who do evil the same way that he loves people who do good.
All right. Okay. So then you don't believe God loves everyone equally. I'm not
based
putting
on your
you on.
action.
The only reason
right.
I'm pushing it on Ben is because I have had this discussion with Christians through my whole adult life. And I'm not even saying who's right. I only want to clarify if I'm right that there is a distinction, that when I don't believe, to use the quintessential evil, I don't believe God loves Hitler and Mother Teresa equally. Okay? And Christians have a problem with that statement. Do you? Do any of you?
Yeah. There's a dispute within Christian theology on this point, as I understand it. I think it's Duns Scotus who accepts that divine love might be distributed unequally. But I think the point is that within the Christian tradition, that the person that God loves least is still loved more than any human being could possibly be loved. And so the way in which God's love, as it were, energizes our, as it were, horizontal love and regard for other human beings is, to all intents and purposes, equal.
Well, the love would be the hope, the eternal hope, let's say, on God's part that the prodigal son returns.
Yeah.
But sometimes a prodigal son can go a hell of a long way out into the darkness.
It's sort of like how you at any point, and my kids will get old enough and understand what I'm about to say, you love all of your kids, but you don't like them all equally at all points, right? It's not, like, the idea that, the question is, what is it about us that God loves? Because we're not a particularly lovable species. So what is it that God really loves about us? And I think he says at the beginning of Genesis what he loves about it, which is that we have the capacity to be something great, right? We're made in his image. That's the thing he loves about us. He doesn't love our sins. And I think this is where people make a grave mistake. I think they believe that the
and then
phrase
if you're
God...
99% sin, you're kind of in trouble.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I think this is where people make a grave category error. They'll say, God loves me, therefore he loves everything I do. Yeah. God loves me, therefore, what is true love? True love is never having to say you're sorry, right? True love is accepting any choice that I make. If you truly loved me as a son or a daughter or a wife or a husband, you just accept whatever I am. And that's precisely the opposite of love. I mean, biblical morality stands in stark opposition to that.
Milton's hell is distance from God.
But there's one of the most famous, one of my favorite saints, Saint Isaac the Syrian. He's a quite radical in terms of this, and he says the fire of hell is the love of God.
Right.
That is the distance, the fire that makes us brings us close to God, the deifying fire that God wants us to come into participation in Him, is the same fire that makes people suffer because they're holding on to their own sins, they're holding on to their passions. So the fire that's actually calling you and trying to purify you, if you hold on to it, it's going to make you suffer.
Which is why love, which is why love viewed from another angle is judgment or justice.
Okay, I just want to say...
It's like, no way, not
Dennis
that.
is not convinced.
He doesn't like that one.
I'm not unconvinced and I'm not convinced. I just want to say, I don't want God to love Hitler and Mother Teresa equally. That's because love is then amoral. It's like God is a love air conditioning system, and the bad and the good get air conditioned the same. But
I think you're objecting to that partly because there's so much emphasis right now in our culture on the notion that any judgment or any discrimination is wrong.
True.
Well, and that's just complete rubbish. If you love something, you need to be discriminating, and that's because you separate what's right from what's wrong. You separate the wheat from the chaff. And you do that because you love the wheat, and maybe you also presume that people are capable of bringing forth good fruit, but you still dispense with... You wouldn't love the wheat if you didn't dispense with the chaff. It's part and part, like that discrimination is part and parcel of love. And it's obvious with your children, because if you love them, you encourage them, right? You and they cry out for this. A child will come and bring you something they drew, and they'll say, maybe two kids will bring 2 pictures. Which do you like better? And most parents will say, they're both wonderful. That isn't what the kid wants. The kid wants the parent to take a look at both pictures and to say, man, you nailed this flower. It's much better than the last flower you drew. This tree, it's a little sloppy and there's some mess around here, and you did a particularly good job here, and you could concentrate on this, and you've made a lot of progress. They want that unbelievable differentiating discrimination because it teaches the child how to move ahead, and children will just bug you to death to encourage you to provide that to them. It's all discrimination. Now, it doesn't mean that you throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? And so you try to get rid of the least amount of chaff possible, I suppose, and gather the most wheat you can. But the idea that there's love without discrimination, that's the Oedipal nightmare, man. It's a terrible thing. It's not just not right, it's terrible.
Our culture's torn between these soft forgivers, and you quoted the film, and then the hard unforgivers. If you take the radical left and Douglas Murray, there's never any mercy. Mm-hmm. We don't have a middle.
Is there also, I mean, if we do have, a difference between, let's say, a Jewish instinct rather than a Jewish dogma, let's say, and a Christian one, maybe this has roots in Genesis and the fact that we have 2 models or paradigms of the fall in Genesis. One in Genesis 3, Adam and Eve, where there's a free choice to take the apple and to fall. And this very strange, and I'm not asking for an interpretation of this strange passage in Genesis 6, but which is clearly a story about demonic possession, right? So the daughters of these creatures that come down, the Nephilim, and they see the daughters of men, they see their fair, they copulate with them and whatever. So there's now in the New Testament, we have Christ saying, both facing sin, your sins are forgiven, but he also casts out demons. Mm-hmm. So
he also returns in Revelation as a judge and separates the goats from the sheep.
Yes. So. No, I'm not claiming that this. But all I wonder is whether, given that we're talking about Jewish law here and the model of obedience to a law presupposing a substantial freedom of choice, that's absolutely central to Judaism, whereas the Christian narrative is rather more complicated because on the one hand it is assuming, generally speaking, freedom of choice, but there's also this other model of participation in Christ, participation in Christ's saving work, and an emphasis upon the incapacity of the believer to actually be good without grace and without the workings of the Holy Spirit, so that all that complicated economy of Christian salvation. So I wonder whether there is a somewhat different perspective on these issues, precisely because at the heart of Judaism is the notion of law, and in the Christian tradition, the relationship between law and salvation is modified by the
Well, I
Christian
prefer the
direction.
word behavior. Ultimately, the difference is, does your behavior save you, or does Christ save you? Does your faith save you, or your behavior save you? It's so gigantic. We could do 8 sessions on that. I totally understand. But I want just those listening to understand that from a Jewish perspective, whereas you can, in fact, be law intoxicated, and one famous rabbi once said that even Jewish law can be idol worship. But as I said in passing, which got no reaction whatsoever, and I'm okay with that, I just want to note it again, however, I believe that the strengths of both religions, faith in one and law in the other, can both be false gods. That's all I
Well, I did a seminar finished a seminar on Nietzsche today, and of course Nietzsche was a radical Christian critic, and he actually criticized Christianity, at least in part, on the grounds that in some way is analogous to the case that you're making, that there's a danger in radical forgiveness, and the danger is lack of judiciousness and the failure to elevate what is noble to the proper place of nobility, that expansive forgiveness. Now, the way Jung responded to that, Carl Jung, was he had a notion from a narrative sense, so it's the coherence of the story, that the Christ of the Gospels was presented as too forgiving to flesh out the image of the ideal properly, and that the revelation was necessary both psychologically as a compensation, so as a visionary compensation for this more one-sided narrative, but also from a narrative perspective in terms of the completion of the book. So you have the revelation where Christ comes back as a cosmic judge with a sword in his mouth, and he's almost all judge. There's just the merciful element is pretty much not there at all, at least in that account. And he's separating out the damned from the elect.
Those come from Christ's words in the gospel. That is the image of the judge that appears in Revelation. It is Christ who talks about the coming of the Son of Man.
Right. Well, it's not an either or,
yeah,
right? I'm
but it's
not
there.
making that
It's there in the gospel.
Right.
I think that, in terms of the division between Christianity and Judaism, I think there's a little bit self-flattering that happens on sort of both sides, in the sense that the hard distinction that tends to get made is Judaism is acts-based and Christianity is faith-based or grace-based, and it is not remotely that simple.
That's right.
I think that Judaism is obviously also faith-based. The idea is that the acts are supposed to be the gateway toward the faith, and what you see in Christianity and in successful branches of Christianity is that it starts off as faith-based, and very quickly it starts to be materialized in terms of ritual, in terms of practice. In the end, any successful religion is going to have to combine both of those things.
Yes. Okay, let's move to Exodus 34 here, remaking the tablets. So, and the Lord said unto Moses, so this is the reconstitution of the covenant in stone.
Where are we reading now?
34, Exodus 34. And the Lord said unto Moses, and I'll read the whole thing, I think, and then we'll start discussing it. And the Lord said unto Moses, hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon these tables the words that were in the first tables, which thou breakest. And be ready in the morning, and come up in the morning unto Mount Sinai, and present thyself there to me in the top of the mount. And no man shall come up with thee, neither let any man be seen throughout all the mount, neither let the flocks nor herds feed before that mount. And he hewed 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and Moses rose up early in the morning and went up onto Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand the 2 tables of stone. And the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of the Lord. And the Lord passed by before him and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children and upon the children's children unto the 3rd and to the 4th generation. Nice phrase there, balancing mercy and justice. And Moses made haste and bowed his head toward the earth and worshipped. And he said, if now I have found grace in thy sight, O Lord, let my Lord, I pray thee, go among us, for it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for thine inheritance. And he said, behold, I make a covenant before all thy people. I will do marvels, such as have not been done in all the earth, nor in any nation. And all the people among which thou art shall see the work of the Lord, for it is a terrible thing that I will do with thee. Observe thou that which I command thee this day. Behold, I drive out before thee the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite. Take heed to thyself, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land whither thou goest, lest it be for a snare in the midst of thee. But you shall destroy their altars, break their images, and cut down their groves. For thou shalt worship no other God. For the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they go a-whoring after their gods, and do sacrifice unto their gods, and one call thee, and thou eat of his sacrifice. And thou take of their daughters unto thy sons, and their daughters go a-whoring after their gods, and make their sons go a-whoring after their gods. Thou shalt make thee no molten gods. The feast of unleavened bread shalt thou keep. 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, as I commanded thee in the time of the month Abib. For in the month Abib thou camest out of Egypt. All that open the matrix, the firstborn, and every firstling among thy cattle, whether ox or sheep, that is male. But the firstling of an ass thou shalt redeem with a lamb. And if thou redeem him not, thou shalt break his neck. All the firstborn of thy sons thou shalt redeem, and none shall appear before me empty. 6 days thou shalt work, but on the 7th rest. In earing time and in harvest shalt thou rest. And thou shalt observe the feast of weeks, of the first fruits of wheat harvest, and the feast of ingathering at the year's end. Thrice in the year shall all your men children appear before the Lord God, the God of Israel. For I will cast out thy nations before thee, and enlarge thy borders. Neither shall any man desire thy land, when thou shalt go up to appear before the Lord thy God thrice in the year. Thou shalt not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leaven, neither shall the sacrifice of the feast of the Passover be left unto the morning. The first of the firstfruits of thy land shalt bring unto the house of the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not see the kid in his mother's milk. And the Lord said unto Moses, write thou these words, for after the tenor of these words I have made a covenant with thee and with Israel. And he was there, Moses, with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water. And he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments. And it came to pass, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of testimony in his hand, that when he came down from the mount, that Moses wist not that the skin of his face shone while he talked with him. And when Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone and they were afraid to come nigh to him. And Moses called unto them, and Aaron and all the rulers of the congregation returned unto him. And Moses talked with them. And afterward all the children of Israel came nigh, and he gave them in commandment all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. And until Moses had done speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But when Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he took the veil off until he came out. And he came out and spake unto the children of Israel that which he was commanded. And the children of Israel saw the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face shone. And Moses put the veil upon his face again until he went in to speak with God. And that's Exodus 34. And so we have the reconstruction of the covenant, and we have this strange idea that, well, Moses is, in some sense, God is now shining through Moses. That's the shining of the face, and that's also the assimilation of Moses to something like a halo, and that's all assimilation of Moses to the solar disk, like the king's head on a gold coin. And the notion is there's something cosmic behind the haloed individual, and something of cosmic intensity that's associated with light shining through him. And all that, I think, is also a poetic description of something like overwhelming and compelling charisma, right? Because someone who's charismatic has that light, right? I mean, something is attractive in the illuminating sense. And so all of that's packed into this revelation of the divine word. But
it also has to do with the fact that people probably notice the difference, that now it's actually Moses that's writing on the tablet. It's not the finger of God. So there's again another level of mediation. It's as if the first law was maybe too high, I don't know how to say it, and now this version of the law is lower, but that also means that Moses appears to the people as God in a way, like he is the image of God that they can't bear. So because they're in some ways lower, they need even more mediation in order for that to be possible.
And also Moses has increased his own level, right?
That's right.
I mean, you can see now Moses' face is shining. Moses is an active participant in the creation of the second tablets. And the first tablets, God just gives it to him, right? He just gives him and they're carved by God, and they're written on by God.
So they're too godlike to begin with. That's one way of reading.
And you can see this, right? Moses is seen as closer to the people in the first iteration, right? He goes up there with the 70 elders, what I was saying earlier about the 70 elders who are all eating and drinking on the mountain. This time God says, no one's coming up here with you. It's just you. No one else on the mountain, anywhere on the mountain. Just you. You come up here. You're going to carve these things yourself in front of me. You're going to sit up here. You're going to become essentially like an angel, right? You're not going to eat. You're not going to drink. Right. You've taken on these inhuman capacities. And so Moses has to rise up himself and become more godly even than he was before in order to take on the burden of how sinful the people have been. God was like, I was willing to descend to the level of the people because I thought the people were at a higher level than they were. They're not at that level. They're at the bottom of the mountain, right? And they proved that they ought to be at the bottom of the mountain, the same place where they were doing the golden calf. But you, Moses, you've proved that you belong at the top of the mountain. It's where you were before, but now the separation between you and the people is just a lot greater.
I wonder if his willingness to have his name blotted out, his whole identity, his role blotted out, is that a test? Is that a gauntlet that almost in him acting in that way, which is godlike in a certain regard?
He's become the mission.
Certainly a sacrificial gesture on his part.
Does that allow him then to get closer?
Sure. Yeah, he's a conduit. I mean, he's clearly a conduit from the language of this paragraph of this chapter. He's clearly a conduit, and also you can see this is a more distant description. The description that God gives to Moses that we just read in chapter 33 is a lot more intimate and a lot warmer than the description that we get in chapter 34 of God. Right? He says, I'm going to be gracious to those to whom I will be gracious in 33, and I'll show mercy to whom I'll show mercy. There's no words about judgment, right? There's no words about guilt. It's just, I'll be gracious and I'll be merciful, but to the people who I choose to be gracious and merciful to, and this romantic language where I'll show you myself walking away, I'll shield you here in this cliff. And then in this chapter where he's saying, Moses, you've risen, but the people are still way down here. Here's what I want you to convey to the people about what I am. And what I am is a description of something great and terrible and awesome and frightening, I mean, because he doesn't just say that he's going to be compassionate and gracious and slow to anger and abounding in kindness and truth, and that kindness is going to extend thousands of generations. He says something that actually runs directly counter to something that we know from the rest of the Bible, right? I mean, in the biblical commandments, one of the things that actually distinguishes the biblical morality from the morality of, say, Mesopotamia, from Hammurabi's Code, is Hammurabi's Code specifically says that you can punish children for the sins of their parents. Right? If your parent doesn't fulfill a debt, you can take the child in bondage in Hammurabi's Code, right? You can actually punish kids for their sins. And the Bible explicitly says that you're not supposed to do that, right? Children do not get punished for the sins of their parents. But yet here you have God saying, I don't acquit the guilty and I hold their descendants to account for the sins of their fathers, right? For generations and generations. So how do you square those two ideas that God says?
Putting the whole stress on the ending there, whereas if I understand this right, don't you Jews call this the 13 attributes of
mercy, right? Well,
the
so
first part, I mean, we've seen
so
the awe of God.
right, and what happens is we tend to elide the last part of the verse,
The
right?
golden calf, you could have had judgment only, but actually it's overwhelmingly compassionate and merciful.
For sure, but when we talk about the 13
You're
when we
right.
talk about the 13 attributes of mercy, so we read this over so on Yom Kippur, right, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, we read this particular verse over and over and over again. 2/3 of the verse, right? We stop at the part where we get to, and also I'll punish you for the third and the fourth generations, because we're praying to God for the merciful part of Him to apply. They both are there, but the distinction is the one that I'm pointing out, and the reason I'm pointing that out is because the description that God, I think, is giving of Himself in this particular chapter, as opposed to the last chapter, is a descriptive. It's a description. It's a description of Himself. I think that people are going to read this as though it's normative, as though God is saying you should be punished down to the third or fourth generation if you sin. And God is saying there is a way that the world works. And I stand behind that world, but the way that the world works is that sins that you commit now will in fact be visited on the third and fourth generation, because that is in fact the way that the world works. Intergenerational pain, intergenerational trauma, intergenerational sin is a very, very real thing. And I'm not here speaking specifically about groups, because I think that, group sin is a very difficult thing to try to attribute. But individual sin you for sure see, right? You can see how your grandparents had an impact on your parents and they reacted to that, and then you reacted to your own parents, and how your kids react to you.
You also can see that you have to fix it, because it's like what you're handed down from your parents is a torn fabric. And you get the fabric, but you get the tear. And the tear stays a tear unless you sew it back up. And if you sew it back up, then you can hand your child a garment that now doesn't have a tear. But if you don't fix it, then the tear just propagates.
And one of the things that's so, I think, painful around, I was thinking generational trauma right before you said that, as you're describing it, because that's never made sense to me, right? Because then it feels different. But with generational trauma, one of the things that's so painful about it is a lot of times if there's a necessary, not necessary, but a flaw that you inherit, a lot of times we will overcorrect in certain ways, right? And then it's like we want to pass on to our kids something that is almost like compensatory a little bit the other way, and then they're swinging the other way. It's like this pendulum that you're trying to get right generationally. And the further that it swings, the harder it is to try to adjust and hold the center for them.
By the way, in verse 1, sorry, Stephen, verse 1, so we raised the question previously, was Moses wrong in shattering the tablets? And we didn't come to a conclusive answer, and there may not be. But I do think that verse 1 of this chapter suggests that God is annoyed with him for having done so. And I have two pieces of evidence. The Lord said to Moses, carve 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will inscribe upon the tablets. I carved the first.
That's right.
You broke them. Now you carve them. I am not carving a second pair. I have a second proof. The words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered.
There you go.
Why does he add which you shattered? Just said the words that I carved on the first tablets. So I think it's fairly dispositive. God is annoyed with him
There's an
for having
interesting
done so.
and obscure tradition that I heard, and I actually don't know where it comes from, but I thought it was illuminating. It was this notion that the first tablets were made out of precious stones, that they were made out of some sapphire or something like that, and that the second tablets were made out of common stone, like granite or some kind of building stone.
More base.
Yeah, and that then in some ways, just like this idea of the sea of crystal or the sea of precious stones, that the first law was very reflective and was like a jewel, but in some ways was not, let's say, not enough to, not made in a way that you can build out of, or you can't build out of precious stones.
You heard to shatter them if they're made out of precious stones.
I think there's also a very
Maybe diamonds,
There's a very deep. I think there's a very deep question here that Dennis is onto, and I think it pertains to why does this have to happen twice, right? I mean, there's, and if the stories were identical, first and second, that would make no sense, right? It would be as if because what's going on here is not kind of the stone of time just turning around and around like this, kind of the eternal recurrence of the same. And you think about this in psychological terms. Let's say you sin against someone you love, and then you do it again, and then do it again, and every time you just I'm sorry. There's no learning, right? There's no adaptation to or mediation of your sin into redemption. And so I think partly what's going on here, and I think Dennis is onto this, is that there's a story between these two, right? There's purification, there's an elevation and transformation of Moses. There's all these things that allow for this not to be simply a kind of blind eternal circle, but rather a kind of spiral. And that, of course, is the spiritual life.
A spiral upwards. Well, and that's also the struggle with God, right? That's part and parcel of the redemptive process. And I was talking earlier about the relationship between prayer and thought, and so there's the humility part. I have a problem. There's a revelation part, but then there's the relational part that's part of the struggle with God, because it says in the Gospels, I believe, that you have to test the spirits to see if they're of God. So you imagine you open yourself up because you have a problem, you get a revelation. Then you engage in a relationship with the revelation. That's actually what critical thinking is, right? And I really mean it's a relationship, because what you do is you have a thought, an intuition, an inspiration, a revelation, and then you allow part of yourself to embody that as a spirit, and then you take another part of yourself and you turn it into an adversary, and you say, well, is that actually a good idea? Has the idea that's revealed itself to me, is that practical for this time and place? And you do enter into a dialogical relationship with it. And so I don't think that's unlike the idea of entering into a relationship with God. And that's like the idea of the struggle with God. And that's like the idea that it's the people who struggle with God that are God's chosen people.
Yes, and it also means that your memory, your history, your consciousness matters, right? That's what's taken up, right? It's not you forget and then there's no history and then you do it again. It's precise. I think what this whole narrative in a way is telling us, this is a history of salvation. It's giving us, it's revealing to us a kind of template for how our own movement, our own knowing, conscious movement through time really matters.
Stephen, that's why in Catholicism you can't take confession if you're planning to sin. You can't go to wash it clean to just commit the act again.
You can't take communion before you've had
There's a beautiful idea in sort of Jewish redemption, which is that when you perform a perfect act of redemption, the sins that you had done before actually become merits.
Yes.
Specifically because of that, because you're turning what was a sin now into the fundamental building block of a better relationship with God and a better you. The other thing that I think is very interesting about this particular chapter is the focus on, it seems like this kind of random bevy of commandments that just come. It's like, okay, now I'm just going to download on you. You ready? Okay, here's a bunch of holidays and don't see the kid in its mother's milk and all this, which is why I can't eat a cheeseburger and all the rest of this stuff. And what the fundamental kind of just thing that seems to unify a lot of these commandments is the idea of separation, right? Which is the root of the word separation in Hebrew is kedusha, which is holiness. Holiness is rooted in separation. And so if before the first covenant seemed to be very much about coming together, it's about I'm going to, in love, unify with the people and we're all going to be one, and then the people broke that. And now God says, okay, that didn't work, right? You've proved yourself unworthy of that. The only person who I can speak to face as a friend is Moses. The rest of you clowns, not going to happen that way. What you actually need is more focus on the separation, right? You need to separate from the molten gods. You need to separate from the peoples. You're going to move into the land. You cannot interact with those peoples. You need to have holidays that are going to separate out.
That's more discrimination, right, rather than union.
Right.
And he's separating from them to say, Moses comes down, he needs a veil.
Right. It's a more distant relationship. And it's also a recognition that when God is less unified with you, reality seems harsher, right? It's a harsher reality that God's ushering you into, in which you can't unify with everything around you, right? Not everything is one. You're going to have to draw distinctions, and distinctions are really, really hard. And if you fast forward to Leviticus, this is exactly the language that God uses with regard to the children of Israel when He says that you will be holy because I am holy, right? Kedoshim tihiyu, right? The idea is I'm separate. You guys are also going to have to separate yourself. Separation in Judaism is a very, very big thing, and in religion generally. And so God is saying essentially, maybe we all thought that there was something beyond the idea of the law or the rules or the separations. But until you conquer that, until you're capable of separating off from your past sins, or Egypt, or until you're capable of separating off from idolatry, until you're capable of separating the 6 days from the seventh, right, then you're not going to be able to approach me at all.
Now, what would you say to someone like Jan Assmann, with his book, The Price of Monotheism, who would claim that this jealous God is, I'm playing the devil's advocate, you might say. No, it's precisely this jealous God who is distinguishing between false and true religion that is the source of so much persecution.
Well, like the Islamic fundamentalists destroying the Buddhist statues in Afghanistan.
Right, but there's no command. This was the point made earlier, and it's so critical. There is no even hint that the Jews are to make war upon those who believe in false religions. In fact, in Deuteronomy, there is a verse that is mind-blowing. God gave the constellations and the stars and the sun and the moon for others to worship, but not you. There has never been a hint that you kill a non-Jew for having a false faith. So that the person who wrote that book... And you can distinguish
that from God claiming that the Hittites and the Canaanites and so forth...
Yes, totally.
Okay.
As is in fact said in the Torah, only until they are not removed until they have reached a level of evil, not false theology. There's no concept of persecuting people for false. They sacrificed children. They had reached a level of evil. And by the way, if you Jews don't keep my law, you get kicked out too. Mm-hmm. That is also in this book. God is not ethnic, he's ethic. It's a point that needs to be made. May I make one other critical one about these 13 attributes? There is one attribute: God will not clear the guilty. There is no other, and please tell me if you differ with me, because this is a very important thing to me. A lot of Jews don't believe in an afterlife, and they don't know that Judaism does. And it is to me, it is central. In fact, it is to be honest, it is a source of my own calm on this planet, that there is an afterlife. He will not clear the guilty. Obviously, it has to mean an afterlife, because the guilty are very much not cleared in this world. The only place there could be a non-clearance of the guilty is in an afterlife. And I just wanted to make that point.
So I'll play devil's advocate with you a little bit on that. Not on the afterlife generally, I agree, but on this being a proof of the afterlife. It depends on sort of how you read the phrase. Do you read the phrase ending with acquit the guilty, or do you read that in context of acquit the guilty, holding descendants to account? Meaning that the way that guilt actually manifests for the people who are guilty is via the consequences that are visited upon the future generations naturally.
But you would agree with me that both are true?
Yeah, I mean, obviously.
Because let's say the bad guy doesn't have children. Does he get away with it?
I mean,
right. Okay.
From a Judaic perspective, there's also the possibility that
Jonathan, I just wanted to pick up on what you were talking about before. Maybe also to help people think about it in this way: that is, all existence is unity and separation. That everything that exists has those two characteristics. And you see that right away in Genesis 1. That is actually the way that God creates the world. He gathers things together, he separates things. Those are the two actions. So, right, everything that exists has a way in which it binds towards one, and then it has a way in which it cuts things that don't belong to it away. And like Ben said, depending on the moment, depending on what the situation is, you can emphasize the unity, and you can also emphasize the cutting off. And so, as like you said at the beginning, God is saying we're going to be together. This is going to be the way in which we're going to commune. And then because of the falling, then I will emphasize the separation. But ultimately, it is to manifest the fullness of communion. But it's as if God is saying, well, right now what you need to do, like you said, is clean your room, right? Clean your room first, and then you'll be able to find something that, like a purpose that will bring you together.
Well, we should point out, just for the sake of fleshing out that argument, is that you can't see anything without that continual interaction. This is a cup because It shares features with all the cups that are like it, functional features, objective features, but it's also a cup because it's not a book, right? And so things are what they are because they move towards their unity. That's the defining feature of their perceptibility, but that's also a differentiating act simultaneously. And you can see that sometimes there's confusion about one, and that if it starts to blend in with other things too much, it gets vague and not useful.
And I'd actually want to make a Christian defense of separation laws, because that's one of the things that so few people understand the separation laws. Like, don't mix linen and wool. Like, how stupid a law is that, right? But in fact, if you understand law as a kind of training, it's the best way, I think, to understand it. Like, I always tell people, when you're teaching your child to shake someone's hand, you're not teaching them to touch someone else's hand. There's a whole implicit way of being, how far to stand from someone, look them in the eye. There's all of these things which are actually training them on how to be. And so in the law, there are laws that are there in the very practical way to say you have to understand how things are separate. If they become confused, then the world is undone. Right? If things become confused, then the world is undone.
That's a collapse into chaos.
That's right. So there's so the multiplicity. If you're not able to separate, I mean, you see it now. Like, you could say that today there's a disease of that.
Yeah.
Like, people don't. If you see it how it's related, you'll notice that this kind of fluid identity.
The only unity is diversity,
and leads to all the things that the Scripture says not to do. Like, it'll lead to confusion of levels, like cannibalism, like incest, like boiling a kid in its mother's milk sounds like it's stupid, but it's actually saying you have to separate the generations. You have to know the function. The milk of the mother is there to feed the child. If you kill the child with the milk of the mother, you're actually confusing all the functions of what these things are for.
That's the witch and that's the witch in Hansel and Gretel. Right.
Why that?
Well, because it's all encompassed. They're lost in the forest, right? It's the wilderness. They go in. It's endless treats, and they're being fattened up to be devoured. It's cooking the child in mother's milk.
Oh, yeah, interesting. In that sense.
Yes. Okay.
So 2 quick observations. The first is that Jordan's cup has had such a starring role. In this, I feel like the cup's cupness has been contemplated like
so many times.
Yeah, I know.
From a business perspective, we're going to have to auction it off.
That's right.
That's the holy grail. This thing.
But
the Holy Grail.
Ben, you said something. You said that sins can be changed to merits, or what was your? I don't want to paraphrase.
The Judaic concept is that when you repent, your prior sins become merits.
And so I've been thinking about this so much because you talk about how the meek shall inherit the earth means those who have swords but keep them sheathed, right? And what good is a sword that you have sheathed if you don't know how to use it, right? So you necessarily have to know how to use a sword in order to be a peacemaker, basically. And so we live in this culture now with the internet and with social media that we never forget anything, and seemingly we never forgive anything. And so there's this impossibility to transfer if somebody, of course, who you want is somebody who has sinned, right? Who has asked forgiveness for that and come clean and integrated that into merit because they know more. It's the Jungian integration of the shadow.
Well,
that's
the easiest
power
way
and the
not
force
to sin is to never do anything.
Right, and then
that's not useful.
Well, that's being cooked. That in some ways that's being drowned in your mother's milk, right? You're not separating, and so it seems like we're just stuck at this moment where it's so difficult for us to be able to, like, forgiveness seems like it's a central missing tenet when you think about the polarization in culture. And what we want more than anything are the people, in some regards, who have displayed movement. Right? And not just movement for movement's sake, but movement away from something that is sinful. And if you manage to have that and convert it to merit, there's so much power in that.
All right. 35 to 39. We've just dispensed with that in that moment. It's a reiteration of the construction of the sacred space, the ark, the processes of ritual, the nature of sacrifice, an aid to remembering them, an emphasis on how important they are, but for the purposes of moving the story forward, we don't have to reiterate them. And the same thing happens in Exodus 40, which is the last book of Exodus.
Forgive me then. There's one comment on one thing in 35. 35:3. You're not reading 35.
No,
correct?
I'm not.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I'll read it from the version that we are, the King James. So everybody has it. 35:3. You shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day. I just want you to know this is why I don't smoke my cigars on the Sabbath, because of the banning of making a fire. It is that is one of my great sacrifices, and this, you're big.
We all appreciate
that.
that.
I want you to appreciate it. If you don't love cigars, you really don't appreciate it. It's his empathy without real empathy, and I can handle it.
You're also limiting your carbon dioxide output and your particulate production.
I know.
We appreciate that too.
Dennis is really big on Juuls, though, on like the smoking of the Juul cigarettes, which are smokeless.
Oh, J-U-L, that's right. No, that's a separate. That truly is a separate. But in all seriousness, that is why I don't smoke my cigars on for those 24 hours.
You smoke them every other day?
Yeah, every other day. Absolutely. It's a mitzvah
Religiously.
every other day. Yes. It is a merit. It is to my merit that I do. I just want you to know, since you've asked, so the oldest World War II vet died just a couple of years ago, and I think 106, a black veteran in Texas. He was asked at 105, what is the secret to your longevity? Dallas Morning News, you can look it up. And he said, God and cigars. And I thought, I'm here for a long time. That really was very encouraging to me. I just do want to say, though, that this is very powerful. You are, and Ben, you'll find this of interest because of our mutual Orthodox background. There was no ban on lighting a fire on any other holy day. The rabbis extrapolated, but it is not in the Torah. And I worked very hard on this in my commentary. And I am convinced that the reason for this very archaic sounding law is because outside of the creation of a human being through intercourse, there is no ex nihilo creation that humans can engage in like making a fire. There is no fire, and then there is fire. Water becomes ice, trees become a house, everything becomes something. Fire is from nothing. We don't light a fire, I am convinced, on the Sabbath, because we are imitating God, who stopped creating on the Sabbath, and this is our way of imitating God by not creating on the Sabbath, not lighting a fire.
I just wanted to ask why, I know it's not identical repetition, but why this repetition at all? I mean, the discussion again of these things that in some sense have been covered earlier.
I think culturally it might be because it's an aid to memory. I mean, a lot of the biblical structure and the repetition of lines and verses is partly an aid to memory because it was an oral tradition. So I suspect, and I don't know this, I suspect that has something to do with it.
There are minor differences, but I think that the basic idea is that because the covenant was abrogated, right, you broke it. So now we have to recreate it. And we're going to lead into it with all of these distinctions that we were talking about before, right, the separation. But you're not completely barred from the possibility of unity. Right? The tabernacle doesn't disappear. You would think it would, right? I mean, after the covenant is broken, this house for God, where he's going to dwell among you, and not only that, Moses is going to remove himself outside the camp, and from now on, you're all going to stand at the openings of your camp, of your tent, and you're going to look out at the tent where Moses is, and that's the direction you're going to pray. You would think that God wouldn't even attempt the recreation of the tabernacle. It's an act of, actually, we don't talk about divine mercy. That's divine mercy, right? Is that the covenant has been broken, and now God has to reestablish,
so
and is willing to reestablish the tabernacle.
It's a new cosmogony.
Exactly.
Right,
it's a complete rebuilding of a second world.
Yeah.
And so in some sense, it's important to remember then that this is itself a liturgical text. We talked about the temple and about ritual, and the third thing was worship.
Yeah.
There's some sense in which the repeated engagement with this text, as Ben and Dennis do in the Jewish tradition and as Christians do in various ways, is itself a way of entering into and making that real in your
the
your
breaking
own life.
of the covenant and the shattering of the tablets is a return to pre-cosmogonic chaos, and you do have to put a cosmogony back on top of that in order to reconstruct the world. And so I guess it's walking through that essentially.
You could almost see it as also a microcosm of, again, what happens in Genesis. Again, you have a covenant, it falls apart all the way to Noah, then you have a new covenant, and then it moves all the way. So you have these worlds that end and these worlds that begin.
And that's
like
life, that's life. I mean, that happens to us all the time, is that that we shatter even our covenants with ourselves and fall into pieces, and then the covenant is renewed and we move on, or we stay in the desert, we stay in chaos.
It's the trial. It's like you broke it, build it again.
Mm-hmm. But the description of the building is important.
Yeah.
Kind of repeated passages.
Chapter
there.
40.
It's really crucial. Well, we'll come to that. I don't want to anticipate it, but it's the stress is on the actual the action and the setting themselves, orienting themselves to a common endeavor. Is key.
Right? Doesn't it? There's not just one verse that said, and then they did it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like it describes them taking every single step to actually build the thing.
Right.
Which is the Aristotelian
Right.
point that you were making yesterday. Right. Now
Right.
they're going to train themselves in virtue by actually doing the thing step by step,
Right.
and it's so important that we have to read
Right.
that they did the thing step by step.
We are what we
it's the
repeatedly do.
necessary attention to the particulars.
Exactly.
And we talked about last session at length in the first section of this. This is also speaking deeply to the procedural memory.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
It's ritual. The point of this is we repeat and we repeat.
And I suppose it's also a sacralization of the particular. It's that it's that even the particulars, which don't have the same narrative compulsion for readers centuries later, even the particulars are worthy of attention that would be paid to the sacred, and that's very useful.
Everything
Put each
matters.
brick in the right place.
Yeah.
Right.
And also
Everything
everything
matters in
matters.
the whole heavenly hierarchy.
I think also when you read this stuff, and it's really abstruse. I mean, you read it and you're like, okay, so this is how they built a socket. Okay, well, I mean, I could read the engineering guide to my radio another day, but that's what it feels like, except that, I think there really is something to the idea of performing actions in which you don't know exactly why and doing it repeatedly. I know there's been a big controversy in the Catholic Church recently over the return of Latin liturgy, for example. And from a Judaic perspective, it seems not only appropriate, but very good that Latin liturgy should be used in the Catholic Church, in the same way that there was massive controversy in Judaism in the early 19th century over whether you should be allowed to use a translated text of the prayers. Right? The Orthodox said you read in Hebrew, and even if you don't understand the Hebrew, you read in Hebrew. And this will be a spur to you learning Hebrew and actually engaging with the text. And the Reform movement said, no, you read in the language of the vernacular, you read in German. And the Orthodox said it's a disaster if you do it that way, and you're not going to be able to hold together a religion that way. And it turns out the Orthodox were right. I mean, there has to be something to doing things that you don't fully understand as a spur to learning to understand
Well, it's
those
also
things.
part of your commitment to the collective.
Right, exactly.
Right? I mean,
it's skin in the game
There is
thing.
an
Yeah.
arbitrariness about the collective, just like there's an arbitrariness about a game. Like, it's not an absolute arbitrariness, because it wouldn't be a good collective if it was just arbitrary. But to some degree, when you play a game with other people, you go along with the rules. And the most unpopular kids are the ones who, well, everyone agrees to play a game and they say no. It's like, well, I don't want to play, or we should play a different game. It's like, you don't get the picture here. Of course it's arbitrary in a sense, but what's not arbitrary is that everybody has to play the game. That's also why, Jonathan, you pointed this out to me so constantly, is that, well, part of the reason that people need to go to church is because that indicates their commitment to the collective. They're actually acting it out. And of course, it's an imposition in some sense on your personal freedom on the Sabbath, but it does indicate your willingness to sacrifice that particularity for the collective, and that is a sign to...
It was your argument for wearing a suit.
Right, or exactly, definitely.
And it also, I think, it provides a good guide to who is going to be a false prophet and who is not going to be a false prophet, meaning that the person who is the real prophet is the person who is actually engaging in the skin in the game. The person who's the false prophet is the person who's substituting their own rationale for the skin in the game. Meaning you actually have to show that you're committed to playing the game. You have to actually show that you're committed to the practice. And then you can ask questions within that, and people don't feel threatened because they understand that you're part of the group. You're not seeking to tear down the institution.
You talked to me about that previously and said that was such an interesting point. I thought that willingness to go along with the rules of the game is actually one of the things that opens up a space for very contentious, peaceful dialogue. It's like, yeah, we're playing the same game, but we can play pretty damn rough within the game.
Right, this is why religious people, I mean, just on a very generic and silly level, religious people, we can tell jokes about each other's religion pretty much all day long and not get offended, because we all understand that we're committed to essentially the same broad outline. But it is offensive when somebody who's outside that starts telling the jokes, knowing that they're doing it because they actually don't like the thing that you're doing, right? I mean, and that's true for pretty much any agreement that you have with other people. There's a lot of freedom and this is, I think, one of the reasons why America feels like it's kind of breaking down right now on a broad level. If we shared a set of values, we could joke around about the silliness of that set of values. We could talk about, like Dennis and I can talk about all the areas of Jewish law that we think are problematic and annoying and silly. But if you have a generalized commitment to Jewish law, it's not coming from a place other, and thus we must blow up the system.
Right, you're not
right? You don't want the punchline of the joke to be, and thus we must blow up the system. And so that's
joking's a veil. Like when we lose humor, it's so dangerous because it's a veil, right? It's the same way. It's a way that we can engage with truths indirectly.
And I guess what I'm saying is that when you're coming at it from outside the system, it's not a joke, and we can tell it's not a joke.
Right. Maybe you just this whole thing now has opened up another read on my story to you about the atheist convention, where not one raised their hand that they challenged their atheism, whereas every religious person raises his hand. Maybe we're more secure. With all our questioning, maybe we're more secure in our faith than they are in their atheism.
Well, the faith is already a risk, right? I mean, you've already taken the risk. It's the opposite of what people often think about with religious faith, is that in the face of all that doubt, you've decided to take a risk. And so you've already built in the tolerance of that doubt into, the acceptance of that doubt into your faith. Right?
Yeah, and that's shared across the board. So the thought would be that diversity is only a strength if we're all engaged in something like a common endeavor.
Sure.
There's some kind of common horizon.
E pluribus unum.
Yeah,
right,
that's right.
Exactly.
And this is Robert Putnam, who's the one who talks about this, right? Robert Putnam, the sociologist from Harvard, who wrote Bowling Alone. And this is his basic premise, is that diversity is actually very much not a strength unless you actually have a common point of orientation.
Well, Mount Sinai is diversity and unity.
That's right.
Right.
Well, it's
And
the
what we were talking about just before, the alternative to
right,
Pharaoh.
exactly.
And what we were saying just before in terms of the notion that for all beings to exist, they have to have something in common and they have to be different from each other and also different from the outside. And so it's all being functions that way.
Right,
so
right.
when Justin Trudeau says
the unity,
diversity is our strength, it's like, no, diversity alone is decomposition.
Right,
it's
especially when he
death.
allies that with the claim that there's no central uniting ethos. Canada doesn't really have a culture, and diversity is our strength. It's like, that sounds like chaos to me.
Sounds like death.
Yeah, that's the point of these passages, surely, that success comes and unity comes when you're all focused on the same project, building a home,
right,
in effect.
Right. And it
building
gives
a
you
nation,
the
building a home.
to integrate the diversity that way. Right, okay, all right. So on to Exodus 40, the last chapter, and we won't talk about 1 to 33 because that's a reiteration again of the cosmogony, as we've pointed out. So we'll start with 33. So Moses finished the work. Then a cloud covered the tent of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses was not able to enter into the tent of the congregation because the cloud abode thereon, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. And when the cloud was taken up from over the tabernacle, the children of Israel went onward in all their journeys. But if the cloud were not taken up, then they journeyed not until the day that it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was upon the tabernacle by day, and fire was on it by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel throughout all their journeys. And so that's a reiteration of the cloud of fire and the cloud, or the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud, the notion that this interplay of opposites is guiding the Israelites, the idea that there's an autonomy of the guiding spirit. Sometimes it rests and sometimes it moves. And we all know that in our own life, is that sometimes there's a day to not move forward, just to rest if you have some sense. And then there's another day where the spirit that moves you towards the land of milk and honey is compelling you to move forward. And
there's actually, it's a cosmic image in the strictest sense, because they built the tabernacle, the people camp around, you basically have this square, right? I talked about how the earth is square, right? This basic structure, and then the glory of God is there. That's when the structure holds. The glory of God goes up, the world is undone, and now it's like fluidity. We move, and then when the glory comes back, we set it up. It's like you're awake during the day, and you work and you do things, and your consciousness goes away at night, and you sleep, and it's a little death, and then you wake up again in the morning. It's just a pattern of reality.
And I think the cosmic element comes through too in the obvious echoes of the creation narratives from Genesis in 39 and in 40. I think you have as the Lord commanded Moses in chapter 39 7 times, as the Lord commanded him 7 times in chapter 40. Is clearly echoing that, the 7-day rhythm, and then right at the end, as you just read out, Jordan, in 33, so Moses finished the work, the sense of completion at the...
just like at the end of the creation.
Exactly.
But
there's one more. Sorry, go ahead.
Surely the national equivalent, what happened to Moses, he saw God almost unmediated, and the radiance shone out. Here the glory is on the national tent of meeting. And I think this is the fulfillment of the whole of Exodus. They were liberated to serve and worship him,
Right.
and here they're doing it. Everything's
Right,
driven
well,
to this.
that's another indication, too, that the covenant has been reestablished properly and that the people can now, well, it's interesting, too, is
That's why the book ends there,
Yeah,
by
it
the
ends
way.
there. Exactly, is that now the people can also bear this paradoxical juxtaposition of the fire during the day and the cloud during the night. Things are in balance, and there's a guiding principle that's being reestablished at a national level. So now the people have a destiny, too. They can move forward towards the Promised Land because they're united in their vision of the Promised Land and their commitment to the covenant. And that's definitely how things work, is like we're trying to move towards it together into the desirable future. That's what we're doing, and we need to deal with the vagaries of existence while we're doing that, and we can't do that unless we're united collectively. And so it seems like it's a pretty good description, as you said, of the patterns of reality itself. So
I think there's an almost minor tragedy that happens in the very end here with these verses, and it's kind of hidden there, but you see that the glory of the Lord fills the tabernacle, and it goes out of its way to say, and Moses could not now enter the tent of meeting. Now remember, just a few chapters ago, it was Moses literally every day going into the tent of meeting. The cloud would lower on the tent of meeting. Moses would be in there speaking face to face with God as a friend, and the people were apart. Now that the tabernacle has been built, Moses is one of the people. Right? Moses is no longer, he's obviously the conduit, and God's going to speak to him, and he's going to convey those messages to Israel, but now he's been separated a little bit from God. It's not God and Moses versus the people.
no,
now
the
it's
prophet's
God.
not necessary when the people are following God.
Right, exactly. And so he's had to, so that extraordinarily intimate relationship that you see at the very end of chapter 34 that we were talking about, or the end of chapter 33, beginning of chapter 34, that extraordinarily intimate relationship has to be mitigated just a little bit to allow for Moses to be a member of the people that he has chosen to be a member of, right? When he shifted his language and he went from your nation to us, right? I want you to travel with us. And God takes him at his word. He says, okay, I'm going to travel with you, the collective you, right? You can't come into the meeting tent when the cloud is on the meeting tent anymore.
But it's also a sign of successful mediation, right? Because what we have now is not only a goal and a kind of community, but we have a principle of movement through time, a means of redemption, forgiveness. You mess up, here are the laws that you follow, here are the ways, what you do when you break the law, and here's the place that we erect every time we stop in order for those rituals to take place. So it's kind of like anything else in life. You can have the big epiphany, but what matters is, being able to systematize or rhythmatize, you're living it out in a way that you can understand through time.
That's part of Mount Sinai as well. Well, and the notion of community is obviously related to the word commune, and that's to commune with God. And so the community is now united under God, and that actually was what makes it a community. And and people can be very skeptical about such things. You can have a community without being united under God. It's like, no. Whatever you're united under is your God. It's essentially, by definition, if you're not united, you're not a community. Well, you're united under some principle, because that's the principle of unity, right? Otherwise, you're not united. And so the question immediately arises, well, if you're not united under God, one nation under God, what's your God? None. We have none. Well, or we have a multiplicity of them. Well, then you're polytheistic and paganistic and anxious and confused. And if you don't know what your God is, then you're just unconscious. Like, that's not helpful. So it's so interesting to me that this is the case, because the case seems never to be faith or lack of faith in some real sense. It seems to be you have faith in something. It's like, is it explicit or implicit?
It feels like the faith here, it's sort of like where we have arrived is that the laws have been, once there's proper humility and subservience to the laws, we can move forward as a community. Those are the things, because faith definitely can't do it alone.
Well, and that's and that's definitely the case in any society. Is you're gonna kneel before the law. If you're an American, you kneel before the law. You accept in fact, you act out the body of the law as well. You're an imitator of the law, and so there's no difference between that and in some way a celebration of the law, because you're actually acting it out, the body of laws. And so you definitely have to subordinate yourself to the spirit of the law. And the question is then, what's the spirit of the law? The fundamental spirit of the law. And that's what this book is trying to sort out. Well, congratulations, everybody. We reached the end of Exodus, and now in some ways this is bonus material, and so we'll move into the bonus material. Bonus material.
I just want to ask Greg, did you ever imagine you would be making the case for Jewish law?
Yes.
Just This is a great moment, ladies and gentlemen. No, gentlemen. There are no ladies, right?
All right, are we ready? Leviticus, I'm going to read, this is from Wikipedia since we cite our sources, and the book of Leviticus begins with instructions to the Israelites on how to use the tabernacle, which they had just built. This is followed by rules, more differentiation of the rules of clean and unclean. That's this differentiation
We dealt a little
and
bit with
separation.
this, which is good. We don't have to read them.
Which includes the laws of slaughter and animals permissible to eat, the Day of Atonement and various moral and ritual laws, sometimes called the Holiness Code. That's Leviticus 17 to 26. 26 provides a detailed list of rewards for following God's commandments and punishments for not following them. 17 establishes sacrifices at the tabernacle as an everlasting ordinance. But this ordinance is altered in later books, with the temple being the only place in which sacrifices are allowed. So that's Leviticus. And we're going to turn. Now, for everyone watching and for all of us participating, we're not going to go through all of these books because that would take another year. And so we've tried diligently to edit the next books and select so that we can keep the narrative flow without being lost too badly in the details, and so that we can bring the entire seminar to a good narrative conclusion. See if
Can
we
I say
match
one word
that.
on Leviticus?
Yes.
Leviticus is known for arcane laws of purity, impurity, skin diseases, and a lot of sacrifices. At the exact middle of Leviticus is love your neighbor as yourself. Just wanted everyone listening to be aware of that. That's where it comes from.
So the hidden treasure and all that detail.
And not only hidden treasure, but again, the holy surrounding the ethical.
Okay. All right.
And the center around which everything else coalesces.
Yep.
Okay, Leviticus 10. This was suggested by Ben, so we'll turn this over to Ben after I read it. And Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, he's the mediator between Moses and the people, took either of them his censer and put fire therein and put incense therein and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had commanded them not. And there went out fire from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. Then Moses said unto Aaron, This is it that the Lord spake, saying, I will be sanctified in them that come nigh me, and before all the people I will be glorified. And Aaron held his peace.
I actually want to get your take on this, Jordan, because this is a deeply disturbing passage, obviously, because this is like case in point of people who are good getting killed for doing a good thing, presumably. And so there's all sorts of reads in Jewish philosophy and Jewish commentators about what exactly Nadav and Abihu do wrong. And you know they're extremely holy. I mean, we just read in Exodus that they're some of the people who go up on the mountain, they feast, and they see the great vision of God with his feet on the jeweled covering and all of that. But they take these fire pans and they're making an extra sacrifice, right? They're going in to serve God, maybe in an act of ecstasy. There's an attempt later to connect this with maybe they go in while they're drunk or something like that, because there's later commandments surrounding this. But that's not clear from this, at least, portion of the text. And so it's not clear that they actually do something deeply wrong other than that it's unauthorized fire. And then there's sort of a natural consequence of that, which is that the fire goes out and kills them.
What's unauthorized fire?
Right, so it just means that God didn't command, and like God's very specific about what you're allowed to take in. And so maybe they think, okay, well, but I can volunteer to do more than that, right? I mean, it's not like that's the limit, right? I mean, maybe God told us we can do all of these things. I'm going to bring an extra sacrifice because I feel that close to God that I would, like, who does that, right? I mean, who's like, I love God so much, I'm going to bring this extra sacrifice just because I love God this much, and then they die for doing that. And so this is puzzling to obviously it's tragic for Aaron because it's two of his sons, and Moses is their uncle. And the words that Moses speaks here, it's such a kind of a shocking thing, because it's a parent who watches their kids destroyed by the God he's been serving his entire adult life, essentially. And Moses tries to console him. And the phrase "and Aaron was silent" is one of the most tragic verses in all of the Bible, right? Is because it doesn't say how Aaron responds to Moses. Moses says he's sanctified through those who are closest to him. It's almost Job-like. I'm gonna try and explain to you why this thing just happened? And what does even Moses mean by he's sanctified through those who are closest to him? Right? Does he mean that God had to do that in order to prove his strength? Does he mean that God demands most of the people that he's closest to? It's not totally clear what Moses is saying. And it's also not clear whether Aaron is satisfied and so he's silent, so he hears the critique and he's silent about it, or whether he's silent because there's literally nothing to say, because he's struck dumb, which for Aaron is directly opposite to his character. He's the great speaker, right? He's the person who's constantly the mouthpiece for Moses. And so I kind of want to get your take on that, because I think it goes directly to how do you deal with tragedy, and how do you advise somebody who's just undergone a tragedy?
Well, the only thing there's two things that came to mind. One was there is some ambivalence in the Cain and Abel story about the impropriety of Cain's sacrifice. It's rejected. And sacrifices are rejected all the time. And this is a situation where the sacrifice is seriously rejected, right? I mean, it results in death. And I guess one of the things I would say about that is that there's an injunction that emerges out of the biblical corpus that you hold your peace before God no matter what sacrifice he demands. And that's rough, right? Because if it's the death of your children, you might think, very frequently a marriage will break apart if a child dies. It's very, very common. It's very hard to keep a covenant in the face of the death of your children. Maybe that's the most stringent test of your faith and your integration with the community, your integration with life itself. But I do believe that, and this is part of the courage and strength of faith, is that you do not get to turn against the central animating spirit of good in mankind, regardless of the particularities of your catastrophe. And that extends all the way to the death of your children. That the injunction is, you will strive to maintain your relationship with that which is holy, regardless of how terrible things get. And that's all I can.
I mean, I think that what you're saying is directly in the text, because what Moses then tells Aaron is something that's really shocking to the senses. He says you're not allowed to mourn your kids. That's the next thing he says, right? He says that he says that you're not allowed to dishevel your hair, you're not allowed to tear your clothes. Tearing your clothes is the first thing that the Jews do when you hear that a relative has died. You tear your clothes, and then you're actually supposed to wear that torn piece of clothing for a full week. That's what you do during Shiva. And so he's explicitly telling him, don't do that for your sons. He says it'll bring fury down on the whole community if you do that. Right, that if it's clear that the person who's supposed to be, the spiritual leader of the community is the high priest, if that person brings into question the justice of God, then the whole community begins to fall apart, which is, a hell of a burden to place on somebody.
We don't want to be Pollyannas about this. It's not as if it's easy under any circumstances to, I've talked to people, very famous atheists, for example, and very good people, I would say, who are appalled by the cruelty of God to children, let's say, call God out on his willingness to allow children to die from bone cancer. And this is not a trivial problem in any sense. And you can certainly have some sympathy with people who say, well, your willingness to maintain your faith in the goodness of being in the face of the death of your children is nothing but your justification for your cowardly religious belief and your unwillingness to call out God when he deserves to be called out. And, you can have some sympathy for that perspective. But in the final analysis, I don't think it's the right perspective. I think it is the case that this is partly what makes faith and goodness itself so difficult, is you don't get to be a perpetrator, period, because you're a victim, no matter how badly you've been victimized. And so, and I think that has to be the case because, well, first of all, we're all victims to some degree that's even not trivial. And if that gives us license to be perpetrators or to be faithless, then have at her, boys. It's nothing but chaos. And so, I think to the degree that the people who are opposed in the most fundamental sense to the Zionist enterprise call the Jews out on this to the degree that they're capable and say, well, the anti-Semitic movements in Europe were justification for the necessity of a Jewish state, and the whole world agreed on that. But then, well, are the Jews replicating that in their proclivity to victimize the Palestinians because of their own suffering? And I'm not saying I agree with that, but it's it's so interesting that the Jews are being held to account on that part. Is like, you don't get to use your own victimization as any excuse for the persecution of others, and that's to stop being good. And so
Desmond Tutu says, may we be eternally vigilant for justice for today's oppressed or tomorrow's oppressors.
Can I ask why Ben or anybody assumes that Nadab and Abihu were trying to do a good thing?
Well, there's nothing that overtly suggests they were trying to do a bad thing.
Right,
It says
okay,
the fire is
but so there's-
unauthorized.
right, so
I'm
there's
not
no-
saying that
So there's no. All right.
Well, I mean,
so
well,
at the
Moses'
be-
language sort of
all
suggests it,
right,
right? Moses says they're the ones closest to him, right? So it sort of suggests that.
Well, Zar is a foreign fire. Zar is foreign, not strange.
right. So why is it foreign, the fire?
Okay, so my I'm not saying I'm right, but I've never read it as they were really just trying to do a holy thing and they went overboard. I read it as they were doing their own thing, and maybe even a foreign thing. That's what
Like a
Zar,
pagan thing.
Avodah Zarah is idol worship, and
it's the
Zarah is
golden
the
calf
feminine
again.
of Zar, which is the word used here. So I've never read it as these were two guys going above and beyond the call of duty to try to bring a beautiful sacrifice. Just for the record, I may be wrong,
and
but
people can be,
I'm sorry?
People can be too holy for their own good. Right?
Oh, that's-
holier
But
than
Dennis,
thou.
I think that your point makes sense if you think of the tabernacle itself and the way that it functions, and the notion that the tabernacle is the house of the Lord and the people gathered, and that strangers were not allowed to enter into the court of the tabernacle, right? And so there's a sense in which it is the source of the identity of Israel itself. And that's why there are these veils, and the veils have a certain structure, and and there's a hierarchy of materials. You have gold and brass, and you have this whole layout of how the world works. And so they're bringing something which doesn't belong, and they're trying to bring it into the holy place. And so it's just going to consume it, and it's like, I know
you
it
don't
sounds
get to
silly.
do that even if
I know.
you're doing it for good,
But
for
I
good
know
reason.
this is going to sound silly, but I think there's something like, let's use the basketball example again. If I bring a baseball bat out onto the court,
right.
I will be
Yes.
consumed. Like there's
Right.
no,
As
there's
much as
no
you
room.
want to make a basket with it.
As long as there's nothing wrong with the bat itself, and it's like it's just not. Don't bring thing from the outside into the holy place.
I mean, the only counter I'll ask you actually is so then is Moses lying to Aaron when he says that through the holiest he'll be sanctified? What's he talking
Wait,
about?
so
there?
where are you reading
So
from?
now I'm talking
10,
about
3.
verse 3, right? Moses says to Aaron, "Of this the Lord spoke when he said, I'll be sanctified through those close to me, and before all the people will I be honored." So who are the people who are close to him?
Well, presumably the priests,
Well,
which is Aaron's family.
Well, right. I mean, he's responding. This is the way he's trying to comfort Aaron. So I guess the question is he kind of sugarcoating what the sons did? Is he trying to just make Aaron feel better?
Yeah,
Or does he mean
I
it?
think, yeah. So, it's, in other words, I don't have an axe to grind. I'm just saying this is a new read on my lifetime of understanding Nadav and Abihu, or Nadab and Abihu. So your contention that they may have tried to do something sacred but blew it is based on what Moses says to Aaron.
Yes.
Right, not on what they actually did.
I mean, they did something wrong, clearly. But the question is whether they were intending on doing something pagan or doing something wrong, or whether in an excess of zeal,
Piety.
Right.
in an excess of
Well, I
piety,
think
they tried to go above and beyond.
Wait, so
essentially.
isn't Moses here? One second. What is it again? Which chapter?
10:3.
10:3. So isn't Moses in effect saying, "Look, I have to preserve that which is holy"? I mean, isn't it? You read it as more. I understand the loss that you've suffered. And through holy people, I sanctify what I have to sanctify, as opposed to this is me, God. This is my job. I have to preserve what is holy. That's how I read that too.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think the two readings are necessarily in conflict, right? I mean,
Right.
I think that it's
All
the
right, so,
language
but
of close to me, right?
Your
Where he
sum
says,
total is, and I'm truly learning and happy to hear. You think they brought something with the intention of being, as you put it, a little too holy, rather than bringing something truly foreign.
Well, I'm not sure that those are mutually exclusive. It could have both been something objectively truly foreign, and also they could have been trying to draw themselves closer to
Ben,
God, right?
I think that the thing is that this is going to be a hard one, but the idea, I think what also might be suggested is that God is consuming the two to reestablish his holiness.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's as if it's almost saying like those that come close to God are the ones that are the most in danger of being consumed by God. So it's almost like they lived in this constant risk of being consumed.
Yes.
And so they were the closest to God. It's like they made this mistake, and now God had to.
That's how
So it's terrifying to say that. I'm sorry, but I think.
This is the Everett Fox version. Through those permitted near to me, I will be proven holy. In other words, the higher you are, the greater a responsibility for doing it right.
And the crime is
bigger the risk of the sin.
Yeah, the basic crime, which I think reconciles both your reads, is that they're confusing God's will with their own will.
Right.
That's right.
And effectively what they're doing is that they're failing, therefore they're treating the holy, the source of life, as they're making it unholy. And
this is done. This is done. Just today on my radio show, I read the story. The Des Moines Diocese has announced that in their churches and in their hospitals there will be no preferred pronouns, and that people will go to the restrooms of their biology. And one of the criticisms in the internet was how unchristian of them. What would Jesus do? Jesus presumably would have said preferred pronouns is the way to go. So the number of people who think they are doing God's work is as great as the number of people who do wrong or do right. And
That doesn't necessarily stop them from being consumed.
And they're much more dangerous because they think they are.
It puts me in mind of
or surgically altered.
I mean, it also, it's again, I want to come back to the actual heroic verse here is Aaron's silence, right? Because I think one of the real symptoms of a collapsing society is where your children sin and are punished, and your first move is to challenge the system that punishes them.
It's interesting. The first thing that came up for me when we read this, I had this like premonition of an echo or a dropped handkerchief of Jesus's admonition to Judas for admonishing the woman who's cleaning his feet. Right? It has an aspect of that. And it's so interesting that it's Judas who does that too.
Elaborate on that. What's
well, just meaning it's like it's overly holy, right? It's Judas saying like you shouldn't.
But it's utilitarian in that story because it says that Judas was taking the money and putting it in his pocket. So it's like it's actually pretending to be holy and
that's taking the Lord's name in vain.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to Leviticus 25, and we put this part in to illustrate the fractal nature of the law, and I will read the whole thing because of that, and then I think perhaps that's where we'll close today. So Jonathan has been making the case throughout this seminar that the law emanates from the source that's at the pinnacle of the mount, let's say, from the top, but then it's reflected in all if the structures are set up properly as the antidote to the Pharaoh, the law and what's highest is reflected in all the subsidiary layers. And so what we see here is a representation of the law reflecting the cosmic structure in all of its details. And the Lord spake unto Moses in Mount Sinai, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When you come into the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto the Lord. It's a replication of the cosmic structure throughout every element of the new cosmos. 6 years shall you sow thy field, and 6 years prune thy vineyard, and gather in the fruit thereof. But in the 7th year there will be a rest, a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. Thou shalt neither sow thy field, nor prune thy vineyard. Which is what we do as academics. We have a sabbatical exactly of that sort to renew ourselves and rest in principle. That which groweth of its own accord of thy harvest, thou shalt not reap, Neither gather the grapes of thy vine undressed, for it is a year of rest unto the land. Even the land deserves the rest. And the Sabbath of the land shall be meat for you. That's your new nourishment, the rest. For thee, and for thy servant, and maid, and thy hired servant, and the stranger that sojourneth with thee, and for thy cattle and beasts that are in thy land, shall all the increase thereof be meat. And thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years. And the space of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto thee 49 years. Then, after 49 years, then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall you make the trumpet sound throughout your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you.
That is the line on the Liberty Bell.
It's a way of dealing with inequality, that as well. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and you shall return every man unto his possession, and return every man unto his family. A jubilee shall that 50th year be unto you. You shall not sow, neither reap that which groweth of itself in it, nor gather the grapes in it of thy vine undressed. For it is the Jubilee, it's the Sabbath of multiple Sabbaths. It shall be holy unto you. Ye shall eat the increase thereof out of the field. And that's the fractal law. Let's finish Leviticus today. That'd be a nice ending for the day. So 26, this is Leviticus 26. This is what happens to you if you keep the covenant, if you maintain the covenant. The incentive structure, we might say, right? If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then I will give you rain in due season, and the land shall yield her increase, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. So even nature will celebrate. And your threshing shall reach into the vintage, and the vintage into the sowing time, and you shall eat your bread to the full, and dwell in your land safely. And I will give you peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. And I will rid evil beasts out of the land. Neither shall the sword go through your land. It's all speaking to the integrity of the community. And you shall chase your enemies, and they shall fall by you. They shall fall before you by the sword. And 5 of you will chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight. And your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. For I will have respect unto you, and make you fruitful, and multiply you, and establish my covenant with you. And ye shall eat old store, and bring forth the old because of the new. And I will set my tabernacle among you, and my soul shall not abhor you. And I will walk among you, and I will be your God, and you shall be my people. I am the Lord your God, which brought you forth out of the land of Egypt, that you should not be their bondmen. And I have broken the bonds of your yoke, and made you go upright. So that's all. That sounds pretty good. But then, but if you will not hearken unto me, and will not do all these commandments, and if you shall despise my statutes, or if your soul abhor my judgments, so that you will not do all my commandments, but that you break my covenant, I will also do this unto you. I will even appoint over you terror, consumption, and the burning egg. That's a fever, by the way. That shall consume the eyes and cause sorrow of heart. And you shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. And I will set my face against you, and you will be slain before your enemies. They that hate you shall reign over you, and you will run when no one pursues you. And if you will not yet for all this hearken unto me, then I will punish you 7 more times for your sins, and I will break the pride of your power, and I will make your heaven as iron, and your earth as brass, and your strength shall be spent in vain, for your land shall not yield her increase, neither shall the trees of the land yield their fruits. And if you walk contrary unto me, and will not hearken unto me, I will bring 7 times more plagues upon you, according to your sins. I will also send wild beasts among you, which shall rob you of your children, and destroy your cattle, and make you few in number, and your highways shall be desolate. And if you will not be reformed by me by these things, but will walk contrary to me, then I will also walk contrary unto you, and will punish you yet 7 times for your sins. I will bring a sword upon you that shall avenge the quarrel of my covenant. And when you are gathered together within your cities, I will send a pestilence among you, and you shall be delivered into the hand of the enemy. And when I have broken the staff of your bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven, and they shall deliver you your bread again by weight, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. And if you will not for all this hearken unto me, but walk contrary unto me, sort of a recollection of the plagues of Egypt here, then I will walk contrary unto you also in fury. And I, even I, will chastise you 7 times for your sins. And you shall eat the flesh of your sons, and the flesh of your daughters shall you eat. And I will destroy your high places, and cut down your images, and cast your carcasses upon the carcasses of your idols. And my soul shall abhor you, and I will make your cities waste, and bring your sanctuaries into desolation, and I will not smell the savor of your sweet odors. And I will bring the land into desolation, and your enemies which dwell therein shall be astonished at it. And I will scatter you among the heathen, and draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths as long as it lieth desolate, and ye be in your enemy's land. Even then shall the land rest and enjoy her Sabbaths. As long as it lieth desolate, it shall rest, because it did not rest in your Sabbaths when you dwelt upon it. And all upon them that are left alive of you, I will send a faintness into their hearts in the lands of their enemies, and the sound of a shaking leaf shall chase them, and they shall flee as fleeing from a sword, and they shall fall when none pursueth. You know, you'd think he'd quit there, but no. And they shall fall upon one another as if it were before a sword when none pursueth, and you shall have no power to stand before your enemies. And you will perish among the heathen, and the land of your enemies shall eat you up. And they that are left of you shall pine away in their iniquity in your enemies' lands, and also in the iniquities of their fathers shall they pine away with them. If they shall confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers with their trespass, which they trespassed against me, and that also they have walked contrary unto me, and that I also have walked contrary unto them, and have brought them into the land of their enemies, if then their uncircumcised hearts be humbled, and they then accept of the punishment of their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and also my covenant with Isaac, and with Abraham, and I will remember the land. The land also shall be left of them, and shall enjoy her Sabbaths, while she lieth desolate without them. And they shall accept of the punishment of their iniquity, because they despised my judgments, and because their soul abhorred my statutes. And yet for all that, when they be in the land of their enemies, I will not cast them away, neither will I abhor them, to destroy them utterly, and break my covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. But I will for their sakes remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the heathen, that I might be their God. I am the Lord. These are the statutes and judgments and laws which the Lord made between him and the children of Israel in Mount Sinai by the hand of Moses. And so, we'll end there today, and we'll pick up there tomorrow. This is so interesting. The rewards are there, the punishments are there, the promise of forgiveness and the reestablishment of the covenant is there, and that ends Leviticus. And so thank you, gentlemen, to everyone watching and listening. Your attention and time is much appreciated. To the Daily Wire crew who made this all possible, your work on our behalf, your commitment to the project is also appreciated very much. Your generosity in making this available to people as well. And so, gentlemen, we recommune, hopefully in the sight of God, tomorrow.
Amen.
All right.
The American Declaration of Independence says that our rights come from the Creator. If they don't come from the Creator, they come from human beings. If they come from human beings, we're screwed.
And the judgment is not, I think a lot of people have the view that God zaps people. But actually the judgment here is the consequences of their settled choices.
Here you can see, I mean, it literally says, he despairs. I mean, he goes to God and he says, what is wrong with these people? Why did you give me this job? This is the worst job in human history. What is happening here?